Without further ado, we have Craig Hyde, CEO of Rigor, and David Cummings, founder of Pardot, the Atlanta Tech Village, and chief partner at Atlanta Ventures. And today we're going to be having a great discussion on going from zero to millions of dollars in ARR and building a great business. So DC and Craig, take it away. Thank you.
Awesome. We're really excited to be here today. One of my favorite things to do is to talk with entrepreneurs and hear their story, hear the why, hear the how, hear the ups, hear the downs. And so Craig and I actually met a number of years ago through one of our top sales reps at Pardot. He came into my office one day and he's like, hey, I got this fraternity brother from Georgia Tech who really wants to start a company, and would you mind listening to our pitch? And so Jordan brought Craig in and they gave me this pitch, and I don't even remember what the original pitch was. I'm sure.
Oh, yes. So the original pitch that we came to you with was a gift card marketplace. We were going to sell all types of gift cards online. And the idea that we came up with was because I was working down at Incom, which they make all the gift cards that you see. If you go to a Kroger and you see those big racks of gift cards, and it's all made by essentially one company is the major clearinghouse for that. And they had no e-commerce website. And so our big plan was to go to them, build out an e-commerce site, and have giftcards.com or something like that. And within 5 minutes, David's like, oh, I don't really know anything about e-commerce. That's not really my thing. And we got to talking about kind of the industry that I was in at the time and sort of morphed the conversation to what's going on in that space. And I had a whole bunch of ideas in the space, but it was not the original pitch that we came to. So we almost did a quick 180 within 5 minutes on the business plan to go right into the domain that I had been working in for a long time. So that's kind of a cool start.
So before we jump into Rigor and hear some more about that story, tell us about your first real entrepreneurial journey with the MMA gym.
Oh man, so I've always had a bunch of, a lot of entrepreneurs had the itch and started 50 different companies when I was a teenager and all these side projects and side hustles. But the first real thing that I started was shortly after school. A friend of mine, my best friend from high school, and I got together and got the bright idea to start up an MMA gym whenever UFC was really starting to take off in mainstream. And we got connected with some of the Gracie family and the individuals who were straight out of Brazil and brought a lot of the training here to the U.S. and were able to kind of cobble together a motley crew and get this gym opened up in Holly Springs, Georgia. And my input was I was going to work for my software company at the time and write the checks until we got up and running. And the check part happened, but the up and running never really did. But it actually kind of it got going, but it was never it was never leave my job and go full time into this MMA. And it's actually still running up in Woodstock. It's a Gracie Baja gym, but we're not a part of it. And it was a heck of an experience, though.
So good. So what were one or two takeaways from doing the side hustle at the MMA gym? And big picture, why didn't it work out?
Well, there's a big picture why it didn't work out. I mean, there was a few things, probably because it was not, it was doomed to be from the get-go. But a couple of things that I learned, and John and I were talking about this, wherever John Birdsong is, earlier when he was doing the interview with me, and the biggest thing was kind of the market. Do something that you know and do something that you really care about. I wasn't super passionate about the beating people up world, but it just seemed like such a great idea, and I was like, oh, well, this, it's up and to the right. This is a massive market that's taking off, and so it's got to happen. It's got to work, and so. But once I got into it, I didn't love it, and it wasn't my, the thing that I wanted to do every single day. It was more of a chore over time, And then the other piece of the market side is that, joking about it, but beating people up, the market for people who want to beat each other up and pay for a high-priced gym, that's not a great one because they don't necessarily have there's not the money there to fund it, and it's just not a healthy market the way the software space is that we are in now. So those are the two big things that I learned, and kind of why didn't it work? I mean, there's a handful of things, but the people that I was in the business with, I don't think we were aligned on a values perspective or the long-term vision, and we thought that the up and the right charts that we made in the spreadsheet whenever we were doing a business plan, that those were real before they were. So we didn't give it time, and we didn't give it the runway that it needed to take off if it were going to take off in the long run. So those are a few of the points.
So you were progressing through your career, you had a couple different jobs. What made you decide to take the leap and become a full-time SaaS entrepreneur?
Sure. So we shut the business down, or MMA, and kind of turned the keys over, so they were just going to run their martial arts studio. And we did that about 2008, and I went to work for a large company called CompuWare, and the idea is, to pay back my mom and my friends and my cousins who I borrowed all their money from to get the gym up and running, and then really focus on the career that I had carved out for myself. But really quickly, not really quickly, after a few years, I kind of made the progress that I wanted to make in that company, and I looked at sort of up and down the org chart and saw that my boss had been there for a decade, his boss has been there for 2 decades, the level above had been there for 35 years, and was at a great point financially, but kind of looking up and down the stack of the people in the organization and where it had been around since the 70s, I was just kind of like, what now? I mean, do I put the next 30 years in, rinse and repeat, and make a good living and just have the kind of the easy road, or do I go out and start something, or go out and look for a new challenge? And I was toying with going back to school and kind of looking to find out what's that thing that I could go try and figure out how to master. And the timing and all sorts of stuff just worked out to where I could jump into a new business and start something from scratch. So I had always had this in the back of my mind of getting out there and starting another company once I kind of cleaned the slate from the first business. And I had kept my living situation really lean and didn't go out and buy the new fancy cars when I got the raises or go buy a new house. I still had roommates in a townhouse with a paid-off car and almost no bills. So it was always in the back of my mind, and then the timing and when we got connected, and everything just sort of lined up, but it was an inevitable thing that was going to happen sooner or later anyways.
So you took the big plunge, you started Rigor. What did Rigor do initially? Like day one, what was the idea for the product?
So the day one idea for the product was to have, so there's a space called application performance management. In the startup world, a lot of people know New Relic. It's kind of the big name in the market. But this space has been around for decades, since computers existed, right? It's how to make them faster and tune the apps that are running on them. And I had worked for the biggest company in the space at the time. It's now called Dynatrace. But we basically implemented a bunch of solutions in people's data centers, physical data centers. Like I would crawl around in the data center room down at Southern Company and connect wires and plug things into switches. And we would listen to network traffic and install things on servers to put a big dashboard in an operations center that says green light good, red light bad, go fix things. And we were at AutoTrader, where they had bought millions of dollars worth of our software, and we had implemented it, and all lights were green, and the site autotrader.com went down. And while we were there doing the implementation, and so they drug us into a room, and they said, what's going on? And we're like, everything, all the lights are green, nothing's broken here. And then once they said, yeah, that's fine, but the phones are ringing off the hook, and nobody could use the website. So we found out that it was a third party loaded from a CDN, and it was something, this cloud. It basically means it's software loading from somewhere else, and it's not in the physical data center where we were located. So the eureka moment was, hey, there needs to be this market. There's going to be a new market that's going to be created to not only keep track of, in the same way that we kept track of the applications in data centers, but as all the technology moves out of those data centers, there's going to be a need for something to keep track of it. And so it was cloud-based performance management software. We were initially focused on going after e-commerce sites because we knew that had the monetary teeth, right? So nobody likes waiting for pages to load, but when you're on a bestbuy.com and it's slow, you leave and you don't buy things. So there's a lot of revenue tied to it. And so our vision was to take that and put it out there for kind of the SMB world, all the mom and pop e-commerce shops that were out there on the internet. So it would have been a credit card sign up, $50 a month, for anybody who wants to start a business to keep track of their site.
So who was the first customer, and why did they buy the software?
So that's a great question. It came at about eight months into the business, and I love to tell this story because here I am, I quit my job in corporate America, making tons of money, and now I'm making no money. I'm publishing software to nobody, and Hubert and I are just working in the corner trying to figure out how to make software. And 8 months later, we get our first customer, and it's controlfreak.com, a local brand here in Atlanta, and they paid us $50 a month. And so we were like sounding the bell, running around, high-fiving each other. Like, we got customers, we're in business. And then I went home that night, and I'm like, damn it. I've been working for 8 months, 2 people, full-time, and we have $50 of total revenue. What am I doing here? But the initial use case, they were trialing our software and didn't really see the value in it, or they didn't really understand it. And I mean, granted, it was new and it was kind of cobbled together, but their site went down, and Rigor told them, and they had no idea, and it would have been down who knows how long. But we caught it and sent the email, and they went. And Ashish picked up the phone and called their e-commerce provider. It was like, hey, your site's down. They went, sure enough, it was. So once we got that win, he's like, I get it, cool, I'll pay for it now. But that was really useful too, because he called his e-commerce hosting provider. It was called Shop Visible. They used to be right down the street, and they had a couple hundred different e-commerce sites on their platform. And they've recently been acquired by a much larger retail software company. And so he sent a Rigor report to the provider, and they called us to say, hey, how did you figure this out? And then we ended up going into their office and rolling out across the 100+ different companies that we were working, or that they were working with. And then they'd take us into their big brands, and so we got our first big deals from that individual customer. So it started to flywheel pretty quick from there, but yeah, the first deal was a $50 deal because we found a problem, and it just proliferated from there.
That's awesome. So 8 months, 2 people working hard.
Full-time.
Full-time.
More than full-time.
More than full-time at significantly below market salaries or no salary.
Yeah, way below.
To get $50. But then that one customer, one e-commerce business in Atlanta, led to the e-commerce provider that they use, which led to dozens more customers. And like you said, the flywheel just started turning.
It was, it's slow and steady, but that flywheel starts to pick up. Just another added kind of story about that is, so Shop Visible, they started working with Tempur-Pedic.com, the mattress company, and they brought us in and they said, Tempur-Pedic was looking at actually my old company, and they said, oh, okay, this is $100,000, and Shop Visible said, we're working with this company Rigor right across the way. Take a look at that. And so we got Tempur-Pedic, which is a huge brand for us, and they were able to do case studies and things like that. And then we also went into Tempur-Pedic and we said, let us make your site faster. Like, let's do a project looking at our software and figuring out what we can do. And we were able to turn the dial for them. And we did a before and after kind of scientific-based test, or scientific method style test where we had controls. And we found out that by doing the things that we figured out, to like making the optimizations that our software picked up, it cut their load time by 1.5 seconds, which doesn't sound that much, but their order value went up a lot. And so they went up, I think it was 15% in their conversion, or their average order values, just by speeding up the site. So you figure if you go to Tempur-Pedic, it's pretty known brand, you're probably buying that beds, but people surfed more on the site and they'd add pillows and buy more items when the site was faster. And so we found that out. This site was doing $100 million a year online, and we're like, holy crap, we just made these people, $100 million, say order value went up 15%. We just made this company $15 million and per year. We're charging them $1,000 a month. Like this, we could be onto something, and we're able to take that story, got it printed out. It got their blessing to share that, and so that was another story that something that became $50 that went to the local startup in town that was hosting the site, that went to a major brand, that we got this mega win, and now we're able to take that all over the place and start replicating it. So it was definitely a flywheel scenario. It's cool.
That's awesome. So you're grinding it out, signing customers, finding different patterns and different items that introduce you to new customers. When did you realize that the business was actually going to work? When did you feel like it was going to be a sustainable, ongoing concern?
Day one, when I decided to go in on it.
Yeah, you just...
Like, always, like, this is going to work for sure. And over time, you can see it more clearly, but you used the term once when you were talking about jumping into it, which is, you said, I was blissfully ignorant, and I just went and started the company, and it worked. And had you done the math, that's probably poor math, right? I should have just stuck with my regular job, but when you factor in the probability and the fail rates of companies, but...
and how many customers you have to sign at $50 a month to
my gosh.
A business that can pay the bills?
Yeah, once I did that math, I'm like, okay, so I got one. Oh, crap, we just need the rest of the earth to sign up, and I'll be able to pay my mortgage. But yeah, so I've never had a doubt that it would be successful, but you can see it much more clearly over time. And now it's like we're talking, hey, we want to be 20 million in revenue in 2020, and it's like I look at the company now, and we already have a $20 million business. We just haven't gotten there yet. So I can just see it so clearly. I don't know. Maybe I'm ignorant in that blissfully ignorant in that way.
So one of the challenges as an entrepreneur is starting the business out. You're the doer. You're actually writing code. You're selling on the front lines. And then once the business starts working, hopefully it does, the company grows, and now you hire some other people, and you become more of a manager. And then now it's at your stage where you have dozens and dozens of employees, and now you have to be a manager of managers of individual contributors. What are some of the lessons learned going from doer to manager to manager of managers?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was cool to see Hubert up here earlier talking about his journey from the engineering side and seeing a lot of those challenges. When you start to see the communication breakdowns, when you're not in everyone sitting around one table working on things, and it starts to become separate teams, and you have to do the communication to make sure everybody's in the loop. But you asked the question, what have I learned about making that transition, or kind of tips? But it's very different. Being good at making software, being good at selling software has nothing to do with being good at managing a team, has nothing to do with being good at recruiting great people or maintaining a culture. And it's a completely different skill set, mindset, the way you operate, and it was very hard for me to make that transition because I'm just kind of like a little bit scatterbrained, but I just like to do things. You know, I'm not the best. I'm not the most organized. I'm not the best planner, and so I've had to work at it a lot. I mean, joined up with EO prior to Entrepreneurs Organization, and I went through their accelerator program. I have professional coach. I have a bunch of mentors, but it's something that just I've had to consistently work at over time. And but a big key takeaway is just recognizing that being the best at doing something doesn't make you the best manager. It doesn't make you the best leader, and you really have to work at the specialties and the becoming a leader and becoming a manager, you know, from a mindset and also a skill set standpoint. It has to be intentional, I believe, at least.
So it's an ongoing challenge even to this day, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely.
So from an entrepreneur perspective, typically entrepreneurs are good at one thing, whether it's building the product or fundraising or marketing or sales or whatever it might be. What's your superpower? Why have you been successful beyond?
Oh, where do I start? Beyond?
Beyond just willing to grind it out and that willingness to will it to success. I think that is a superpower, but what beyond that grind ability that you have?
So I believe where I have been successful is I've got a technical background, and I just not only that hey, I went to school and studied engineering, because that doesn't really matter all that much, but I get technology, and I kind of can see how it all works, and I'm fascinated by it, and I like to learn about it and tinker with it. So I'm technical, but also I've been more like on the sales side as well. So kind of blending sales and the business and trying to marry those two has been where I've made my success throughout my career, is just understanding how technology works and having the chops to be able to go in there and figure it out and write some terrible code when I need to. And then also being able to translate that to the high-level business standpoint. And so that's kind of been, the combination of those two has been kind of what I've hung my hat on so far.
So a lot of SaaS companies start more in the low end of the market or the first couple customers, whoever they can find. Mm-hmm. And then over time, as they garner more success, they move up market.
Yep.
So your first Rigor customer ever was $50 a month. And today you have several customers that pay six figures a year for the product. Mm-hmm. What were some of the thoughts and lessons learned as you slowly moved up market over time?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because if you read up on like SaaStr, and the common knowledge out there is start small and increase your ACV over time, your average customer value, and continue to build out more enterprise and features and go up market, and that's how you get the real scale. We did that, but we didn't know that we were doing that, because the initial market that we were thinking of going after was just SMBs, because we thought, well, there are so many more of them. And as we built up our feature set and listened to the customers, we realized that, hey, we can go in there and compete and win these big deals. Like, we're better than these companies that have been signing $1 million contracts. And so it was more of an evolution, and it wasn't so much purposeful on our end. But I think it seems like the right strategy, or at least a commonly addressed strategy, is to start small and raise your ACV over time by going up market. And we're still not done, because we're building out new features every day, which expands the total market that we can go after, so we can get more of customers' wallets. And we've got a couple seven-figure contracts that are floating around out there with customers right now that hopefully we could start to talk about our $1 million customers sometime soon. But yeah.
So one of the common tensions within a SaaS business is sales potentially selling in advance of the roadmap, which is a fancy way of saying they sell things that don't exist yet. And then there's the engineering tension, where it's building new features, but also acknowledging that you got to retrofit some things, you got to redo some things, you got to knock out some technical debt. What have you seen in your business over time between that tension between sales and product development?
Again, seeing Hubert up here talking about it, and he was really funny because he's like, hey, why can't we just build this one thing for this one customer that we're about to get, which was what I came to Hubert with every time I talked to a customer in the early days. We got to make this one thing, and in many ways, we built a lot of functionality. That's our flagship functionality, where we sold it first and then made it afterwards. But I think the tension has to be there. If one side wins and one side is totally dominant, I think that's where you might get an unnatural balance. If engineering always wins and we're building everything perfect and we never release software until it's completely bug-free and we never sell anything other than what we have right now, then you might not make as much progress. You wouldn't get as much feedback. You wouldn't see the people who are voting with their dollars. You'd be making stuff for your own ideas. But then if you're on the other side where sales just rules the earth, the whole direction of the product and whatever some company wants to show up and buy, that's what we make today, then you end up with a lot of spaghetti code that becomes unmaintainable and it's not scalable, and sooner or later that's going to blow things up. Or it'll weigh you down to the point where you can't move forward. So I really think that there has to be some kind of delicate balance between the customers driving the product evolution, pushing, and then engineering having the brakes to be the checks and balances, to be like, hey, we need to slow down, and especially in the middle days, we had to pay down a lot of technical debt, and so we had a lot of healthy, passionate debate on that topic. So I like the balance.
So for SaaS entrepreneurs, one of the things that we get excited about is recurring revenue and high gross margins and the predictability of the business model. But over time, what typically happens is there's an opportunity to help customers at a one-off level, not necessarily from an engineering point of view, but from a consulting and professional services perspective. And so Rigor recently added some professional services offerings. Mm-hmm. Take us through that thought process to go many, many, many years with no pro services at all to recently introducing it.
Yeah, so we had some pro services very, very early, and then like many software companies who are like, nope, we're not selling any services, we're only software. Log in, use the software, and send us a check. And it works, but when we sat and thought about what was the customer's experience, and if you're that customer and you're logging in, cool, some software does some features that I need, you don't really have an attachment to that software, so the human element is something that's really important for making a connection. But the software is never going to be perfect for everyone's workflow, and sometimes you have to augment that with humans doing things. And it's either we put the onus on the customer to do that, or we pick up some of the slack and do some professional services to help them get their job done. And in our case, with the professional services arm that we added, we call it Faster as a Service, where we go in and we help them be successful with optimizing their website for a performance standpoint, and help them set up best practices for building in performance practices throughout their dev lifecycle. And we go in there and sort of teach them how to fish. And we find things, the customers are more successful. They have a better attachment to our company. They know who we are. And when they're more successful, all the metrics follow. So it was mainly driven by what's the right thing to do for the customer. And we figured out that, look, the right thing to do is to get somebody out there on staff to help them out sometimes. And so that's kind of why we spun it up. And we just started doing this last quarter, and we've seen a lot of good success. We've got a bunch of case studies that come out of it already. And we're really excited about it moving forward to scale that up as we scale.
That's awesome. So one of your recent hires is a new Chief Customer Officer.
Yeah.
So you don't see that title in the marketplace too often. Tell us about the thought process of hiring a Chief Customer Officer.
Yeah. Well, you've met Francis a couple times, and so Francis Cordone is our Chief Customer Officer. He lives in New York City, and he actually trained me at my last company at CompuWare, and he was head of enablement and pre-sales, and then he went to another company and headed up delivery at this big software company called Turbonomic. But in between, he left, and he said he had this mindset, I'm always selling software. I want to go be implementing and making real progress inside of a company. So he went to go be the Chief Performance Officer at a top 10 bank called Bank of New York Mellon. And he had 70 people on his team and spent millions of dollars on performance software like ours, and they're a customer of ours as well. And we had always stayed in touch. We shared the philosophical ideal about how to deliver value to a customer and not just show up and drop off features on their desks. And so we've stayed in touch over the course of the past 7 or so years. And last year we added, talking about core values, like what Karen was talking about, we added a core value of customer first to our deck of values. And really the mantra is like, look, we got to do whatever is right for the customer, and then everything else good will follow. And when we started talking about that, he shared how he was unhappy with how other people were doing it, and we aligned so well about the way that we should be delivering value to customers and the experience that the customers should have, and that timing kind of worked out. That's sort of the story of how it became Francis, but the notion of having an executive at the table that represents and is the voice of the customer, like I don't know how you can be a customer-driven company without the voice of the customer in the room. From a symbolic level, once you get to a certain scale, right? You always have your marketing, sales, engineering, finance. Like who's talking for the customer? And I thought that the idea of bringing somebody in the room who represented the voice of the customer and had actually been on the other side of the table, had actually been the one hands-on keyboard and leading teams doing the work. I just really liked the idea, and Francis was a perfect addition to our team, and he fit well with our culture. We knew who he was, and I don't know of a better person in this space, somebody who knows this space better than he did. So all that kind of came together, and that's how we ended up pulling him on board in the role of Chief Customer Officer, and it's been fantastic.
That's awesome. So most of the Rigor team is here in Atlanta, but you do have some remote employees, and Francis works remotely from New York. What are your thoughts as a SaaS entrepreneur of remote team members?
I guess on remote team, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. It works for Francis. It works for Chuck, who is a rep that we have who's out in Houston. And it worked for Eric when he was in LA and he came back to Atlanta. But I don't know that it would work all the time. You have to, it takes a certain type of person to work remote because there's a lot of added overhead that they have with communicating back with the mothership. They don't get to walk the halls. They don't get to have the serendipitous interactions and the water cooler talk and understand what's going on. So overall, I'm a big fan of having a centralized office, even though it might damage some productivity of cranking out widgets. I think the collaboration is important. But there are certain times when you need a certain type of person or a certain individual, and they are not in Atlanta. And we're willing to make that sacrifice when the person is the right person and has the ability to stay connected, put in the extra work to stay connected with the team and bring them back once a quarter, all those kinds of things.
That's great. So recently, Rigor won an Inc. 500 award for being one of the 500 fastest growing private companies in the United States. Tell us about your goals early on to win that award, and then the self realization when you finally won it.
Yeah, so that had been a goal of mine since I was in college. I worked for some company that had an Inc. 500 picture on the wall, and I was like, what is that? And I went and Googled it and was like, oh, I want one of those. And then 2007, which was a few years after college, Kyle Porter and I, who were pledge brothers in college, he's the founder of SalesLoft, CEO of SalesLoft, which is an awesome startup here in town. And we went to go see this guy who was giving a talk at ATDC for a tag event named David Cummings. I don't know if anybody's heard of him. And he gave a talk about how he bootstrapped an Inc. 500 company, talking about Hannon Hill. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. And who here doesn't want to be David Cummings when they grow up? So I had, as a written down goal for at least 10 years, that one day I want to start an Inc. 500 company. And to the point where every year I'd look at it and I'd start seeing the growth rates of what are the ones in the, what 3-year growth rate do you need to get Inc. 500? And I'd be doing the math of, okay, if we're at 260K this year, that means we have to do this much. And I'd start running all the formulas. And so I knew that we were pretty close to making the cut in 2016 once the dust settles and the number came in. And we got the award this year, which was super cool. So I got to check that box off the life goals list, awesome. Which was really fun.
Very cool. All right, it's almost time to open it up for questions. But the last question for Craig before we do that, what's next with Rigor? Where do you go from here?
Got to improve every day. Mm-hmm. And the drum that the mantra that we're going to is that we want to get to 20 million in 2020. And the reason why that's a significant number is we want to be a growth-based business, and always growth as a company, it brings change, it brings new opportunities for everybody in the company, and it brings growth for all the individuals that are in the business. And so we want to stay dynamic, we want to stay growing, and we want to stay improving. And 2020 and 2020 is kind of like the metric in the ground that we think if we're going at that rate, we know that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for a lot of people that are opening up. Long term, we want to build an established brand that lasts for a really long time. I mean, 20 years from now, I want Rigor to still be a company. I want it to, and the logo and the things that we've built, it should still exist. And so, there's the what's next, but there's also kind of like that long-term vision. And the long-term visions, it'd be awesome 20 years from now having reunions talking about the good old days, right? And so that's kind of where my head's at on that front.
All right, let's give it a round of applause. Love diving into the journey. Any questions on, all right, let's just dive straight into it.
Thanks. So you mentioned that you make a good product that's better than the competition, and your competition are normally bigger companies. Mm-hmm. So as they say, no one gets fired for hiring IBM. How do you go into these larger enterprise companies and make the case that or do you even make the case that you are a small company? Do you avoid the whole startup word completely? Or if you don't, then how do you make the case that you are better to these people that are used to more enterprise solutions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And in many cases, in some cases, we do compete against the IBMs of the world, or IBM. And it is challenging. I mean, the answer is kind of whatever it takes. Each company is different. some people like to take bets on small startups, and some people like to go with the surefire thing. And so it's trying to figure out early on who are the type of people who are going to take bets on the small startups, and then we start to leverage those wins. And when we could put in a pile of case studies, hey, we have Home Depot, Ticketmaster, News Corp, Akamai, and we throw all these big logos. I'm sure you're probably more advanced than a top 10 bank, like our one of our customers, or reference to different customers. But it does take sort of get in where we fit in and get some early wins with people who would bet on you, like Matthew Swanson, wherever you are. Thank you for that. So he bought early at Sync, and he's been a Rigor customer for a while. But Matthew is a startup guy himself, and he was like, oh, I want to work with the innovators. And so we were able to leverage some of the wins and keep building from there. And sooner or later, now we have the proof, enough proof points that we can go to big customers and say, hey, we know what we're doing, kind of thing. So you find the people who would buy, and then leverage those people to get into the larger accounts.
Great.
What do you think is the most common misconception about being the leader of an early stage tech company?
It's always glamorous all the time. You
That-
never have to do anything that's not fun.
Yeah, that is one of them, right? That it's, oh, you're a highfalutin leader. It's like, yeah, I got to deal with all the crap that nobody else wants to do. Mm-hmm. Take out the trash type stuff, whatever it takes. And there's, I'm sitting up here on stage. That's cool, but there's a lot of other things. I got the inbox filled with backlog of just a lot of stuff to do. There's a lot of work, actual work. Another one is that with successful startups, people will point to one successful startup and say, oh, that's how it is. Oh, David Cummings, he went and started Pardot, and 6 years later, sold it for $100 million bootstrapped, just like that, right? And nobody takes like knowing David for as long as I have, David started building software companies when he was 15 years old, right? And he had a successful startup in college, then he had another successful startup and kind of leveraged that and built Hand in Hill into Inc. 500 company, then had an idea, started Pardot, wasn't what he initially, it didn't have legs, they pivoted, then they went all in on Pardot, and then it started to take off, and then boom, you hear the story. And so you hear that narrative of, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, and I just started a company, and now I'm a billionaire. And the amount of work that goes into it, and the 15, I mean, how long have you been working on software businesses before you started Pardot?
13 years.
13 years, then 6 years to become that overnight success. Mm-hmm. And so they say 10 years to be an overnight success. There's 19 years to be an overnight success. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot of survivorship bias that think, oh, it's just a startup. That's it. And then we go be a billionaire. And there's a lot of work involved.
Okay.
I can hear you.
It's good to see you. So question, early on, one of Rigor's key differentiators was ease of use, and the app was just like great user experience compared to the legacy things you're competing against. Now you've got professional services layered on.
Yeah.
How has the professional services component changed the way that you prioritize feature developments, and has it affected the agility of your user experience in the product?
It's a good question. And so we focus on ease of use, but as you know, there were many user experience problems that we had. But it's, I guess, how do we prioritize? I don't think it's changed the way that we prioritize and think about it. We still want to make sure that we play nicely in their workflow, are very easy from a user's perspective to get up and running, and always trying to shorten that time to value. And it's always going to be a balancing act with that, but hey, we have to release this new feature, and sometimes it doesn't work together. But the professional services gives us a closer look at what the customer is doing. We're actually on site watching them and working alongside of them. So I think it improves the feedback loop and helps us get closer to the customer. And so I think it's a positive thing in that direction.
Craig, I'm curious what your customer acquisition strategy was in the early days and how that's evolved over time as you've grown.
So customer acquisition in the early days, I would scrape lists off websites and guess email addresses and send them, reach out. And then when there were roadblocks about, hey, we would buy this, but it would need this one thing. And I'd go, okay, cool, we'll make that. And so it was reactive and kind of like a little bit scattered, where now it's super organized. So a lot of what we do is still outbound. And so Sarah and Pete are in the back of the room. Sarah leads sales development team, which is still kind of scraping lists and reaching out to the people that we think that would be good fits to use our software. But it's much more scientific. It's much more structured. We know how to turn the dials up and down. And we know that when Sarah's team hands over a lead over to the sales side, then we have the trust and we know we have repeatability. We know kind of how to win deals. And so it's much more scientific now than reactive.
Advantages have you found from being in Atlanta or from being in the Tech Village?
Oh, awesome question. I really can't think of a better place to start a software company than in Atlanta. The cost of living here is so low compared to a lot of these other tech hubs. We go on CNN cost of living calculator and plug your salary in and see what it is equivalent to if you're in San Francisco, right? Everything's double. And the mindset of people in the South, they're genuine people, very community oriented. I mean, we have almost 200 people here in the afternoon to share and help each other. Like the South is very camaraderie driven, and so we've gotten a lot of feedback and help from. I see a lot of people along the way in the room, and there's a lot of really good talent here in Atlanta. I'm biased to Georgia Tech because I went there, but it attracts a lot of really good talent. And so all the things that make Atlanta great is the Atlanta Tech Village is a dense microcosm of that, right? You have a lot of great people with a lot of talent, all walking the halls trying to help each other out all the time. And I just can't think of a better place to start a company and scale it up than in Atlanta Tech Village. I think it's awesome.
Great. 2 more questions. Pierre?
Okay, so I'm a tech startup founder, and I wanted your opinion on this. And I actually asked Hubert his opinion also. And basically, what would you do if you created a product in an industry that doesn't exist, and you are one of 2 companies that are trying to create the industry, and your only competitor has just received $16 million in VC funding?
Yeah, so what are you trying to do if you're going after something new that never has been done before, but somebody is heavily funded? Is that somebody else is going in that direction? I'm going to answer this question like I'm talking to my friend. If something has never been, this is my reaction to kind of like the new companies, so bear with my bluntness. But if something has not been done before, there's probably a reason. Like there aren't really new business models that become successful. Like, so I don't really believe in hey, we're gonna invent this thing that nobody's ever done, and it's gonna be awesome. Everybody's gonna change it. I don't like to think that way. So I don't like going after a market that nobody's served before. I always like to think of something like Airbnb. Oh, it's it's like hotels, but a marketplace or something like that. It's always like a tilt to a business model that has already been done and already been proven. But I mean, if somebody you are competing with got heavily funded, that is what happens. Just go beat them and go win.
So you talked a lot about building a company that's successful. You start with one key customer success, and that hopefully leads to the next one. And those case studies sort of build on each other, hopefully to the moment of triumph. How do you get that first big logo to let them use your logo, their logo? When they don't want to, and they have a policy against it.
Oh yeah. We have gotten legal advice that to just put it on the website. Thanks, Wade. He's like, sometimes they'll tell you to take it down, and they do. They'll let you know. But we just kind of told all the stories anyways, and some people didn't like that, and they let us know. But now we're more structured about it. We wouldn't do that. Well.
All right.
We don't normally do that now.
Well, let's end it there. Let's give a big round of applause to Craig and David.